Yes, okay. I'm sorry. So the question is, how do we think about this moment historically? And by this moment, you're specifically referring to Ferguson. Well, I think that first and foremost, it's crucially important for us to be able to situate Ferguson within the broader social political context of this historic moment. In the sense that, in many ways, Ferguson signals the end of the age of Obama, a period which has had profound consequences for how we think about black politics and black racial progress. So when historians look back at this moment, and when our children look back at this moment, I think that they will remember the Obama years as one of the most devastatingly ironic periods in all of African American history and of all of American history. In the sense that, on the one hand, think about it, the irony of we have a black president, we will now have had two black attorney generals, and also have more black people either running for or in political office than in any other moment in American history since Reconstruction. And yet, on the ground, the everyday conditions for poor and working class African Americans are arguably getting worse, not better. So how do we make sense of that? Well, we know that one of the ways that white supremacy and anti-black racism as political ideologies function or operationalize themselves historically is that there is usually a period of relative racial progress in the United States followed by a virulent backlash. And so scholars of American history will immediately be familiar with this narrative. In many ways, it began in the context of the Civil War. The Civil War gave way to a period of relative racial progress in the United States in that it resulted in emancipation, as well as the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the Constitution, which were crucial, the so-called Reconstruction Amendments. However, all of the political gains of the Civil War were immediately undermined in the context of the emergence of post-Reconstruction, which of course gave way to 65 years of Jim Crow, Jane Crow, and racial lynching. Fast forward to the middle of the 20th century, we saw the same type of historical narrative unfolding in the context of the civil rights movement and the political responses and backlashes to it. On the one hand, we had the American Civil Rights Movement, which resulted in a period of relative racial progress in the United States, in that we had the Voting Rights Act, which was significant. We had the Brown versus Board of Ed decision, which was significant insofar as it desegregated American political institutions. However, all of the legislative gains and the racial progress of the American Civil Rights Movement were immediately undermined and undercut in the context of two political backlashes. First was the emergence of the Nixon presidency and the so-called Southern strategy, which was essentially the racist realignment of the Democratic Party. We then had the age of Reaganism, which Reagan essentially took his playbook from Nixon in the creation of the so-called Reagan Democrat. And it had profound consequences on the legislative gains of the civil rights movement, and it basically constituted a rolling back. What I'm going by with this is that we are essentially living in a third Reconstruction, or a third post-Reconstruction. But here's what's particularly problematic with that assertion. If this is in fact a third Reconstruction or third post-Reconstruction, at least in the earlier two Reconstructions that I mentioned, when the inevitable racial backlash came, at least black folks had some legislative gains that they could hold under their belt as victories. So when the first post-Reconstruction came in the 19th century, black folks at least did have the legislative gains of the Civil War era in that they had been emancipated. That was progress. That was a victory they could have held on to. In the context of the Civil Rights Movement, when the age of Reagan and Nixon hit, at least black folks had the legislative gains of the Civil Rights Movement, the right to vote, desegregation, as victories that they could hold up and kind of fight against or fight for. In the context of this current Reconstruction, What do black folks on the ground actually have to show for this moment as progress, besides the symbolism of having a black president? We know that in the age of Obama, we have actually witnessed a deterioration or rolling back of almost every measurable area of upward mobility for black people. We have witnessed a decrease of black wealth, not an increase, in the age of Obama. We have witnessed an expansion of the prison industrial complex, not a decrease, in the age of Obama. We have witnessed an expansion of the American military empire, not a decrease, in the age of Obama. We have witnessed an increase in high-profile police killings of unarmed black people in the age of Obama, not a decrease. And so, making sense of how we deal with or make sense of this retrenchment is an important concern. And so, the historian William Jelani Cobb refers to this as the paradox of progress. But, you know, the writer James Baldwin had another term for it. He called it the price of the ticket. And so what I'm getting at is that in many ways, I think when the smoke clears and we start thinking about the age of Obama, black folks and the American progressive community more broadly will be kind of scratching its head, asking itself, was it worth the price of this ticket? Sure, we got one black man in the White House, but we have 2 million black men and women in the jailhouse. And so dealing with the devastating irony of that paradox, for me, is the starting point for how we situate this Ferguson moment in the context of the larger disaster of race in the age of Obama. Sure.